The low fuel light had been mocking me for the last 20 miles. I'd pushed my luck too far this time, thinking I could make it to the next major town before filling up. Now, in the dead of night on a stretch of highway darker than a black dog's mouth, I was starting to sweat. Just as I was resigning myself to spending the night on the shoulder, praying nobody would plow into my rig, I saw it. A faint glow in the distance, like a lighthouse in a sea of pitch. As I got closer, I could make out the familiar shape of gas pumps. I'd never been so happy to see a truck stop in my life. I pulled in, the fuel gauge needle barely lifting off the E. The place was deserted, not surprising given it was pushing 2 a.m. A flickering 24-hour sign in the window of the small convenience store gave me hope. I'd fill up, grab a coffee, and be on my way. As I started fueling, I noticed something odd. Despite the open sign, the store was dark inside. No cashier visible behind the counter. I shrugged it off, probably in the back room or something. The pump clicked off and I replaced the nozzle, wincing at the total. These days, filling up a big rig was like taking out a second mortgage. I was heading to the store to pay when I heard it, a metallic clang from the garage bay on the side of the building. I froze. It wasn't just the unexpected noise in the silence. It was the way it echoed, unnatural and lingering. A shiver ran down my spine despite the warm summer night. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. This was how every horror movie started, the idiot investigating the strange noise. No answer came. Just another clang, followed by the unmistakable sound of a ratchet. Curiosity got the better of me. I walked towards the garage, my footsteps crunching on the gravel, feeling obscenely loud. The bay door was rolled up about 3 feet, enough for someone to crawl under, but not for me to see inside without bending down. I hesitated, then crouched to peer in. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust to the gloom. At first, all I could make out were vague shapes, the lift, tool chests, the usual garage equipment. Then I saw him. A man was working under a jacked-up sedan, only his legs visible. He wore blue coveralls and heavy work boots, both stained with grease and age. As I watched, he slid out from under the car. I straightened up quickly, not wanting to be caught snooping. "Excuse me," I said, louder this time. "I need to pay for my fuel." The man didn't respond. I heard more tool sounds, then the creaking of the lift as the car was lowered. This was getting weird. I was about to turn and leave, maybe try to pay at the pump, when the garage door started to rise. The gears groaned in protest, as if they hadn't been used in years. As the door lifted, I got my first clear look at the mechanic. He was older, probably in his 60s, with a lined face and calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. His coveralls were cleaner than I'd thought, almost pristine despite the work he'd been doing. But it was his eyes that caught me. They were pale, almost colorless, and they regarded me with an intensity that made me take a step back. "Help you?" he asked, his voice a gravelly rumble. I swallowed hard. "Yeah, I need to pay for my fuel. Pump 3. He nodded slowly, then gestured for me to follow him. We walked to the store in silence. I noticed he moved stiffly with a slight limp. Inside, he went behind the counter and punched some numbers into an ancient register. $87.50, he said. I handed over my card. As he ran it, I tried to make small talk. "Pretty quiet night, huh?" He grunted in response. "You always work this late?" I pressed. He paused, those unsettling eyes locking onto mine. "Always," he said simply. The way he said it sent another chill through me. I forced a chuckle. "Man, that's rough. I thought my hours were bad." He handed me the receipt to sign. As I scribbled my name, I noticed his hands. The skin was pale, almost translucent, with blue veins standing out starkly. But it was the fingernails that made my breath catch. They were yellow and thick, curling slightly at the ends. Not just mechanics' hands. These looked like they belonged to a corpse. I must have been staring because he suddenly pulled his hands back, shoving them into his pockets. "Need anything else?" he asked, an edge to his voice. I shook my head, eager to get out of there. "No, thanks. You have a good night." He said nothing, just watched me as I hurried out of the store. I could feel his eyes on my back as I walked to my truck. It wasn't until I was inside with the doors locked that I let out the breath I'd been holding. As I started the engine, I glanced back at the store. The mechanic was standing in the doorway, still watching me. I threw the truck in gear and pulled out, perhaps a little faster than necessary. In my side mirror, I saw him raise one pale hand in farewell. I shuddered and focused on the road ahead, telling myself I was just tired, imagining things. It wasn't until I was miles down the highway that I realized something. The car he'd been working on, an old Ford Falcon if I wasn't mistaken, I'd seen one just like it earlier that day. Broken down on the side of the road, a young woman looking distressed behind the wheel. I'd wanted to stop, but I was already running late for my delivery. I shook my head, trying to clear it. Just a coincidence, had to be. Plenty of old Falcons still on the road. But a nagging doubt lingered. I drove through the rest of the night with the radio turned up loud, trying to drown out my thoughts. As dawn broke, I pulled into a rest stop, desperate for coffee and a chance to stretch my legs. While waiting for my coffee to brew, I struck up a conversation with another trucker. "Hey, you ever stop at that little gas station about 100 miles back? The one with the garage?" The man frowned. "There ain't no gas station with a garage for at least 200 miles in that direction, buddy. Nothing but empty road." I felt the blood drain from my face. "No, that can't be right. I stopped there last night. Filled up my rig." The trucker shrugged. "Don't know what to tell you. I've been running this route for 15 years. Unless they built something in the last week, you must be thinking of somewhere else." I mumbled some excuse and hurried back to my truck, coffee forgotten. With shaking hands, I pulled up my fuel log on my phone. There it was, the entry from last night. Time, date, location. I hadn't imagined it, had I? As the days passed, I tried to convince myself it had all been a dream, some hallucination brought on by fatigue and too many hours on the road. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that mechanic's pale, intense gaze. It was almost 2 weeks later when I saw the article. Just a small piece in a local paper, but it made my blood run cold. A young woman had been found on the side of the highway next to her broken-down Ford Falcon. She'd been there for days, the paper said. Died of exposure and dehydration. The worst part? The date they estimated she'd broken down. It was the day before I'd seen her car. The day before I'd stopped at that impossible gas station. I've been avoiding that stretch of highway ever since. But sometimes, late at night when I'm driving and my eyelids are heavy, I swear I see a faint glow in the distance. And for just a moment, I catch a whiff of gasoline and grease. I keep driving. I've been driving trucks for 23 years, and I thought I'd seen it all. Lot lizards, highway robbers, ghost lights on empty roads, you name it. But what happened at the Hollow Creek truck stop? That shook me to my core. Even now, months later, I sometimes wake up in a cold sweat, wondering if what I saw was real. It was a Tuesday night in late October. I'd been on the road for 14 hours, fighting to keep my eyes open. The clouds hung low, a fine mist making the world beyond my headlights a gray blur. I was about ready to pull over and grab some shut-eye when I saw the sign, Hollow Creek Truck Stop, next exit. I'd never heard of it, but hey, any port in a storm, right? I took the exit, the truck's wheels crunching on loose gravel as I pulled into the lot. The place looked like it had seen better days. Paint peeling off the main building, a few flickering lights illuminating a sad handful of pumps. But the open 24 hours sign was lit, and that's all I cared about. I parked and climbed down from the cab, my boots squelching in muddy puddles. The air smelled of diesel and something else, something I couldn't quite place. Rotting vegetation, maybe. This close to the swamps, you never knew what odors might drift in. The bell above the door jangled as I entered. The fluorescent lights buzzed, casting a sickly glow over shelves of road snacks and trucker necessities. Behind the counter stood a man, tall, rail-thin, with a face that looked like it had been carved from old leather. "Evening," I grunted, making my way to the coffee pot. The brew looked like it had been sitting there since the Carter administration, but I poured a cup anyway. Beggars can't be choosers when you're running on fumes. The cashier watched me, not saying a word. His eyes were too big for his face, I noticed. And there was something off about the way he stood. Too still, like he wasn't quite sure how a human was supposed to move. I grabbed a sandwich from the cooler and approached the counter. Up close, the man's odor hit me. That same swampy smell from outside, but stronger. I fought the urge to wrinkle my nose. "Just this," I said, setting down my items, "and a fill-up on pump 3. He nodded, ringing me up. When he spoke, his voice was low and raspy, like he'd swallowed a handful of gravel. "That'll be $42.60. I handed over my card. As he ran it, I tried to make conversation, anything to break the awkward silence. Don't think I've stopped here before. You folks been open long?" The man's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. Might have been. "Oh, we've been here a long, long time," he said. "Longer than you'd believe." Before I could respond, the door chimed again. A woman walked in, young, pretty, looking as road-weary as I felt. She nodded to me and headed for the restrooms in the back. The cashier's eyes followed her, and I swear for just a second I saw something hungry in his gaze. Not lust. This was deeper, more primal. The look a starving wolf might give a wounded deer. I shook my head. Lack of sleep was making me imagine things. He handed me back my card and receipt. "Have a nice night," he said in a tone that suggested he didn't care one way or the other. I mumbled my thanks and headed out to fuel up. As I stood there watching the numbers tick up on the pump, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. Something about this place was wrong. The mist seemed thicker now, tendrils of it curling around my ankles like living things. Movement caught my eye. The young woman from before was leaving the store, heading to a beat-up Honda parked near the edge of the lot. As she walked, she stumbled slightly. Probably just tired, I thought. But then she stumbled again, this time falling to her knees. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to mind my own business, but I couldn't just leave her there. I sighed, replaced the nozzle, and jogged over. "Hey, you all right?" I called out as I approached. She looked up at me, her eyes unfocused. I don't feel so good," she slurred. "Everything's spinning." I crouched down beside her, concern overriding my usual caution. "Did you eat something? Drink something?" She shook her head, then winced like the movement hurt. Just used the restroom. Splashed some water on my face. I was so tired. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the damp night air. I glanced back at the store. The cashier was watching us through the window, that same hungry look on his face. "Come on," I said, helping her to her feet. "Let's get you to a hospital." She tried to protest, but her legs gave out. I caught her before she hit the ground. Without thinking, I scooped her up and carried her to my truck. As I struggled to open the passenger door while holding her, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, measured steps. "Is there a problem?" The cashier's raspy voice made me jump. I turned, the woman still in my arms. "Yeah, there's a problem. She's sick. I'm taking her to get help." He took a step closer. In the dim light, his features seemed to shift and flow like wax melting in the sun. "I'm afraid I can't let you do that," he said, his voice deepening, losing its human quality. The woman stirred in my arms. "What's happening?" she mumbled. "It's okay," I lied. "You're going to be fine." To the cashier, if that's what he really was, I said, "Back off, buddy. I don't want any trouble." He smiled then, and I saw his teeth. Too many, too sharp. "Oh, but I'm afraid you've already found it." What happened next, I still have trouble believing. The man's body began to change. His limbs elongated, joints popping and cracking as they rearranged themselves. His skin turned gray and slick, like the belly of a frog. Those two big eyes grew even larger, bulging out of a face that was stretching, morphing into something inhuman. I didn't wait to see what he'd become. I yanked open the truck door, practically threw the woman inside, and scrambled into the driver's seat. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys. A heavy thud on the roof made the whole truck shake. Long, spindly fingers ending in wicked claws curled around the edge of my window. The engine roared to life. I threw it in gear and stomped on the gas. The tires spun in the loose gravel before finding purchase. We shot forward, the force throwing whatever was on the roof backwards. I didn't slow down. Not when we hit the highway, not when we passed the first few exits. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Beside me, the woman groaned. Where are we?" "Safe," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "We're getting you to a hospital." She nodded weakly, then her eyes widened. "Your arm?" I glanced down. 4 parallel scratches ran down my forearm, oozing blood. I hadn't even felt it happen. The next few hours passed in a blur. The hospital, the police, trying to explain what had happened without sounding like a lunatic. They found drugs in the woman's system, some kind of powerful sedative. My scratches were treated as animal scratches of unknown origin. When I told them about Hollow Creek truck stop, they just looked confused. There was no such place, they said. No exit, no rundown gas station, nothing but miles of empty swampland. I've been back there since in the daylight. There's no sign of the truck stop. No tire tracks, no foundations, nothing to suggest anything was ever there. But sometimes when I'm driving that stretch of road late at night, I see things in the mist, shapes that don't quite make sense. And once, just once, I thought I saw a sign, faded and weather-beaten, Hollow Creek truck stop, next exit. I kept driving. These days, I don't stop at unfamiliar truck stops anymore. I plan my routes carefully, stick to places I know. And if I'm ever running low on fuel in the middle of nowhere, well, I'd rather run out of gas than risk another encounter with whatever was waiting at Hollow Creek. Because the thing is, I'm not sure it's content to just wait anymore. Sometimes when I catch my reflection in the mirror, I think I see something else looking back. Something with eyes that are just a little too big, a smile that's just a little too wide. And I wonder, did I really escape that night? Or did a little piece of Hollow Creek come with me? The whistle pierced the night, a melody so haunting it made my skin crawl. I'd heard a lot of strange things in my years on the road, but nothing like this. Nothing that seemed to reach into my chest and squeeze my heart with icy fingers. I should have driven away right then. Should have put my foot down and never looked back. But I didn't. And that's a mistake I'll regret for the rest of my days. It was a moonless night in early March, the kind of darkness that swallows everything beyond your headlights. I'd been driving for 16 hours straight, my eyes burning from the strain of watching the endless white lines disappear under my truck. The GPS said the next town was still 50 miles away, but my eyelids were getting heavier by the minute. I needed caffeine, and I needed it bad. Just when I was considering pulling over for a roadside nap, I saw it. A faint glow in the distance, like a lighthouse in a sea of black. As I got closer, I made out the familiar shape of gas pumps. Thank God, I thought. A truck stop in the middle of nowhere. I pulled in, the gravel crunching under my tires. The place looked old, real old. The kind of joint that had probably been here since cars ran on leaded gas. A flickering neon sign above the door read, "Last Chance Gas," in angry red letters. Fitting name, given how close I'd been to running on fumes. As I climbed down from the cab, that's when I heard it. The whistle. It started soft, almost lost in the sound of crickets and distant highway noise. But it grew clearer as I approached the small convenience store attached to the station. The tune was like nothing I'd ever heard before. It was wrong somehow. The notes didn't quite fit together right, like a song played on an instrument that was never meant to exist. But damn if it wasn't catchy. I found myself humming along before I even realized what I was doing. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. The fluorescent lights buzzed, casting a sickly glow over shelves stocked with the usual truck stop fare. Behind the counter stood a man, tall, rail-thin, with skin so pale it was almost translucent. His eyes were fixed on some distant point, glazed over like he was in a trance. And he was whistling, that same eerie tune. "Evening," I said, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. He didn't respond, didn't even seem to notice me, just kept on whistling. I cleared my throat. Hello, Earth to Attendant?" His eyes snapped to mine so suddenly I took a step back. The whistling stopped, leaving a silence so complete it felt like my ears were stuffed with cotton. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a dry whisper that seemed to suck the warmth from the air. I swallowed hard. "Yeah, fill up on pump 2 and a large coffee, black." He nodded slowly, punching numbers into a register that looked older than I was. As he worked, I noticed his hands. The fingers were unnaturally long and thin, like spider legs, and they never stopped moving even when he wasn't using them, always twitching, always in motion. I tried to make small talk as he poured my coffee, anything to break the oppressive silence. "So, that's quite a tune you were whistling there. Don't think I've ever heard it before." His head tilted to the side, bird-like. "Oh, did you like it?" There was something in his tone, an eagerness that made me hesitate. "It was interesting," I said carefully. A smile spread across his face, too wide for comfort. "Would you like to hear more?" Before I could answer, he started whistling again. The same melody, but somehow more. It filled the small store, seeming to come from everywhere at once. I felt it in my bones, in my teeth, behind my eyes. And then I saw them, shapes moving in the darkness beyond the windows, dozens of them, hundreds, shadowy figures swaying to the music. As I watched, transfixed, they began to coalesce, to take form. I recognized some of them. A woman I'd seen at a truck stop in Ohio last week. A man whose broken-down car I'd passed on the highway yesterday. Faces I'd glimpsed in rearview mirrors and gas station security cameras. All of them here, all of them moving to that impossible whistle. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed. It could have been seconds or hours. The attendant's melody wormed its way into my brain, making it hard to think, hard to do anything but listen. A sound broke through the fog in my mind. A horn, long and loud, a truck passing on the nearby highway. The real world came crashing back. I ran. Didn't bother with the coffee or my change, just bolted for the door, my heart pounding in my ears. As I reached for the handle, the attendant's whistle changed, became sharp, insistent, angry. The shapes outside pressed against the windows, their featureless faces morphing into expressions of hunger, of need. I could feel them calling to me, begging me to join them in their endless dance. I burst out of the store, sprinting for my truck. The gravel seemed to shift under my feet, trying to trip me up. The air felt thick, like running through molasses. But I made it. Scrambled into the cab and slammed the door behind me. My hands shook as I turned the key. The engine roared to life and I stomped on the gas. Gravel sprayed as I peeled out of the lot, not daring to look in my mirrors. I drove for hours, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Didn't stop until the sun was high in the sky and my fuel gauge was screaming at me. Even then, I picked the busiest truck stop I could find. Somewhere with lots of people, lots of noise, somewhere to drown out the memory of that whistle. But I couldn't escape it. Not really. In the weeks that followed, I heard it everywhere. In the hum of my engine, in the static between radio stations, in the wind whistling past my windows, always there, always calling. I started seeing things, too. Glimpses of those shadowy figures in my side mirrors, faces in the crowd that didn't quite look human. And always, always that damn whistling. I tried to tell people, my dispatcher, other truckers, hell, even went to the cops once, but they all looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I was. Maybe I am. But I know what I saw that night, what I heard, and I know it's still out there waiting. I don't drive that route anymore, changed jobs, switched to local deliveries. Anything to avoid that stretch of highway. But sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet, I hear it, that whistle, and I wonder, are they still dancing out there in the dark? Still waiting for me to join them? And the worst part? Sometimes I want to. God help me, sometimes I want to pull over, step out into the night, and let that melody carry me away. To become one of those swaying shapes in the darkness, free from the cares of this world. But I resist, I keep driving, keep moving, because I know the truth now. I know what's really out there in the night, hiding behind friendly smiles and flickering neon signs. So if you're ever driving late at night and you see a glow in the distance, promising refuge from the darkness, keep going, don't stop, don't look back. And whatever you do, don't listen to the whistle, because once it gets in your head, it never really leaves. And me, I'll keep driving, keep fighting, keep telling my story to anyone who'll listen, because someone needs to warn them. Someone needs to tell the truth about what's waiting out there on those lonely highways. Just whatever you do, don't whistle along. The CB crackled to life, cutting through the monotonous hum of my rig's engine. Hey there, Nighthawk, you're headed for trouble, friend. Turn back now while you still can. I'd been on the road for nearly 20 years, and I'd heard all sorts of crazy stuff over the airwaves, conspiracy theories, ghost stories, tall tales that would make Paul Bunyan blush. But something about this voice, low, urgent, tinged with genuine fear, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My handle's not even Nighthawk, never has been. I picked up the mic, curiosity getting the better of me. Come again? Who is this? Static hissed for a long moment before the voice returned. Doesn't matter who I am. What matters is where you're going. That stretch of I-40 ahead? It ain't natural, not tonight. I glanced at my GPS. I was about 30 miles outside of Amarillo, the vast Texas landscape swallowed up by the darkness beyond my headlights. Nothing but open road ahead of me. Look, buddy, I said. I appreciate the concern, but I've got a schedule to keep. Unless there's a pileup or tornado warning I don't know about, I'm pressing on. The voice came back, more insistent now. You're not listening. This ain't about weather or traffic, it's about something else. Something out there in the dark. Please, for your own sake, find somewhere to hole up for the night. Don't drive this road. Not now. Not alone." A chill ran down my spine despite the warm cab. I'd encountered some strange things in my years of long-haul driving. Inexplicable lights in the sky, stretches of road that seemed to go on forever, the occasional shadow that didn't quite match up with what cast it. But this felt different. "All right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've got my attention. What exactly are you warning me about?" The radio crackled, and for a moment I thought I'd lost the signal. Then so quiet I had to strain to hear it. "They're hungry tonight." Before I could ask who they were, another voice broke in. This one was different, cheery, upbeat, with a slight southern drawl. "Don't you listen to old Crazy Eddie there, driver. He's been spreading his nonsense up and down this stretch for weeks now. Ain't nothing out here but rattlesnakes and tumbleweeds." I felt myself relax a little. Just another late-night weirdo trying to spook people. Probably some local kid who got his kicks scaring truckers. "Thanks for the heads up," I replied to the new voice. "Any real road conditions I should know about?" "Clear sailing all the way to Amarillo, friend. You drive safe now." I clicked off the CB and settled back into my seat, shaking my head. Some people had too much time on their hands. The miles rolled by, nothing but the dashed white line and the occasional glint of an animal's eyes in the brush beside the road. I flipped on the radio, trying to find something to keep me alert, nothing but static and the occasional snippet of a far-off station. That's when I noticed the fog. It crept in slowly at first, wisps of mist curling across the asphalt. Within minutes, it had thickened to the point where I could barely see 20 feet in front of my truck. I slowed down, squinting into the gloom. This wasn't right. The weather report had called for clear skies all night, and this fog. It didn't behave like any fog I'd ever seen. It seemed to move with purpose, tendrils of it reaching out like grasping fingers. I clicked the CB back on. "Any other drivers out there seeing this fog?" Silence, not even static. The mist pressed in closer, so thick now it was like driving through cotton. Shapes seemed to form and dissolve in the whiteness, twisted, writhing things that vanished when I tried to focus on them. A flash of movement caught my eye, something dark darting across the road ahead. I slammed on the brakes, the truck's tires screeching in protest. For a heart-stopping moment, I was sure I was going to hit whatever it was. The truck shuddered to a halt. I sat there, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white, heart pounding in my chest. What the hell was that? Slowly, cautiously, I opened the door and climbed down from the cab. The fog swirled around my legs, cold and clammy. It seemed to cling to me like it was trying to hold me in place. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding muffled in the thick air. "Anyone there?" No response. Just the soft hiss of the mist and the ticking of my truck's cooling engine. I was about to climb back in when I saw it. A shape in the fog, maybe 50 feet ahead. Human-like, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin. It stood motionless, facing away from me. "Hey!" I shouted. "You all right? Need some help?" The figure turned, slowly, jerkily, like a puppet on strings. I caught a glimpse of its face and felt my blood turn to ice. It had no features, just smooth, pale skin where eyes, nose, and mouth should be. I scrambled back into the truck, slamming the door and fumbling for the keys with shaking hands. The engine roared to life and I stomped on the gas. Tires spun for a terrifying second before finding purchase. As I accelerated, more shapes emerged from the fog, dozens of them, hundreds, all with that same blank face. They reached for the truck as I passed, fingers scraping along the sides with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. I drove blind, barely able to see the road, praying I wouldn't go off the shoulder or plow into another vehicle. The shapes kept pace, somehow matching my speed despite their ungainly movements. The CB suddenly crackled to life, making me jump. It was the voice from before, old Crazy Eddie. "Told you, Nighthawk, told you not to come this way. They're hungry tonight, so hungry." "What are they?" I screamed into the mic. "What the hell is happening?" "Doesn't matter what they are," Eddie replied, his voice calm now, resigned. "What matters is they've got your scent now, and they won't stop until they've had their fill." A pale, elongated hand slapped against my driver's side window. That blank face pressed close, the skin rippling as if something beneath was trying to form features. I jerked the wheel hard, trying to shake it off. The truck fishtailed, threatening to jackknife. For a sickening moment, I was sure I was going to flip. Then suddenly I burst out of the fog. The road ahead was clear, stars twinkling in a cloudless sky. In my mirrors, I could see the wall of mist receding, those pale shapes withdrawing into its depths. I didn't slow down, not for miles. Not until the first lights of Amarillo came into view. I pulled into the first truck stop I saw, killed the engine, and sat there shaking. When I finally worked up the courage to check my truck, I saw the evidence. Long scratches down both sides. Handprints on the windows, huge prints, the fingers too long, too thin to be human. I called my dispatcher, told her I was taking a personal day. Didn't offer an explanation. What could I say that wouldn't sound crazy? I tried to convince myself it had been some kind of hallucination. Too many hours on the road, too much caffeine, my mind playing tricks on me, but I knew. Deep down, I knew it had been real. I never drove that stretch of I-40 at night again. Changed my routes, even though it meant longer hauls and less pay. Some things are more important than money. Sometimes, on long nights when I'm alone in my cab, I think about turning on the CB, about trying to find old Crazy Eddie again, to ask him what he knows, what's really out there in the dark. But I don't, because I'm afraid he'll answer, afraid he'll tell me that those things are still out there, still hungry, still waiting for unwary travelers to stumble into their fog. So I keep driving, keep moving. And if I pass a fellow trucker pulled over on a lonely stretch of road, fog rolling in, I don't stop to help. I flash my lights in warning and put the pedal down. Because now I know. There are things out there in the night, things that wear the shapes of men but aren't, things that are always, always hungry. And if you're smart, you'll heed the warning I was too stubborn to take. When a voice on the CB tells you to turn back, you listen, before it's too late. The clock on my dashboard flicked to 12 a.m. just as I pulled into the truck stop. I hadn't seen another soul for hours, and the thought of a hot coffee and maybe some human interaction was too tempting to pass up. I had no idea that decision would haunt me for the rest of my life. The place looked like it had been plucked straight out of the 1950s and dropped into the middle of nowhere. Neon signs flickered weakly, advertising ice-cold Coca-Cola and the best damn coffee this side of the Mississippi. The lot was empty except for my rig and an ancient Cadillac that had probably been sitting there since Eisenhower was president. As I climbed down from my cab, the silence hit me like a physical force. No crickets, no distant traffic, not even the hum of the lights. Just dead, oppressive quiet. The bell above the door jangled as I stepped inside, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. The fluorescent lights buzzed, casting a sickly glow over shelves stocked with dusty packages of beef jerky and ancient-looking cans of motor oil. And there, behind the counter, stood the salesman. He didn't look like he belonged there. Crisp white shirt, red tie, blonde hair slicked back like some kind of door-to-door vacuum cleaner hawker from the 1960s. His smile was too wide, too perfect, like something you'd see in a toothpaste commercial. "Well, well, well," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "What can I do for you tonight, friend?" I hesitated, suddenly unsure. Something about this guy set my teeth on edge. But I was here now, and damn if I didn't need that coffee. "Just a large coffee black," I said, approaching the counter, "and a fill-up on pump 3. His smile widened, if that was even possible. "Oh, I think we can do better than that. A hard-working fellow like you deserve the best, and boy, do I have a deal for you tonight." Before I could protest, he reached under the counter and pulled out a gleaming silver thermos. "This is no ordinary thermos. This, my friend, is the last coffee you'll ever need." I blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" He leaned in conspiratorially, his eyes glinting in the fluorescent light. "Imagine never feeling tired again, never needing to stop for a pick-me-up, never worrying about dozing off at the wheel. That's what I'm offering you." A chill ran down my spine. This was wrong, all of it. I should leave right now. But something kept me rooted to the spot. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the way his eyes seemed to bore into mine, holding me in place. "What's the catch?" I heard myself ask. His laugh was like glass breaking. "Catch? No catch, friend, just a simple trade. This miracle brew for something you won't even miss. Something small, insignificant, really." He pushed the thermos across the counter. It gleamed, looking far too new and clean for this run-down place. "Go on," he urged. "Take a sip. I promise you won't regret it." My hand moved of its own accord, fingers closing around the cool metal. I unscrewed the cap, a rich aroma hitting my nostrils. It smelled like the best coffee I'd ever encountered, with hints of something else, something I couldn't quite place. "That's it," the salesman cooed. "Just one sip, then we can discuss the terms." I lifted the thermos to my lips, tilting it slightly. The liquid was dark, almost black, with an oily sheen to it. At the last second, some shred of common sense broke through the fog in my mind. I lowered the thermos without drinking. "What exactly am I trading for this?" I asked, my mouth dry. The salesman's smile never wavered, but something changed in his eyes. A hardness, a hunger. "Oh, nothing you'll notice right away, just a few memories, the name of your first pet, your mother's face, small things." I set the thermos down hard, taking a step back. "You're insane, I'm leaving." I turned to go, but his voice stopped me cold. "Are you sure about that, Thomas?" I froze. I hadn't told him my name. "How did you—" "I know a lot of things, Thomas," he said, coming out from behind the counter. "I know about the long nights, the close calls, the times you've nearly nodded off and driven your rig right off the road." Each word hit like a hammer blow. He wasn't wrong. There had been close calls, too many. "I'm offering you safety, security, freedom from the constant struggle against fatigue. All for a few paltry memories you won't even realize are gone." He was closer now, that thermos in his hand again. "It's a bargain, really. Think of all the new memories you'll make, all the extra years you'll have, free from the risk of falling asleep at the wheel." My head swam. Part of me was screaming to run, to get back in my truck and drive until this place was nothing but a bad memory. But another part was tempted. "If I don't drink it," I said slowly, "what happens?" His smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Why, nothing at all. You leave here, continue on your merry way. Maybe you make it to your destination safely. Maybe you don't. The nights are long, after all, and there are so many lonely roads." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "And if I do drink it? Then you never have to worry again. You'll be awake, alert, for as long as you want. The open road will be yours to conquer." He held out the thermos. "What do you say, Thomas? Do we have a deal?" Time seemed to stretch. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. Every instinct told me this was wrong, that nothing good could come from this bargain. But the promise of never having to fight sleep again. My hand closed around the thermos. The salesman's eyes glittered with triumph. I hurled it across the room. The thermos hit the wall with a clang, the cap flying off. That dark liquid splashed across the dingy linoleum, hissing and bubbling like acid. The salesman's face contorted, his features twisting into something inhuman. "You fool!" he snarled, his voice no longer smooth but raspy and guttural. "Do you have any idea what you've just rejected?" I backed away, fumbling for the door. "I don't want any part of this. Of you, whatever you are." He advanced, his form seeming to ripple and change. "You can't escape it, Thomas. The long nights, the endless roads. They'll claim you in the end, just like all the others." I yanked the door open, the bell jangling discordantly. "Go to hell," I spat, then turned and ran. I don't remember getting into my truck. Don't remember peeling out of that parking lot, gravel spraying behind me. The first clear memory I have is watching the sun rise in my rearview mirror, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, cold sweat soaking my shirt. I've tried to find that truck stop since then. Drove up and down that stretch of highway more times than I can count. But it's never there. Just empty fields and scrubland. No sign that anything ever stood there at all. Sometimes, on long hauls when my eyelids are getting heavy, I think I catch a whiff of that coffee. Rich and tempting, promising alertness and safety. In those moments, a small part of me regrets not taking the deal. But then I remember the way that salesman's face changed, the wrongness of it all. And I pull over, find a safe place to rest, no matter what it does to my schedule, because some prices are too high, no matter what's being offered. Some bargains aren't worth making, and some salesmen don't have your best interests at heart. So if you're ever driving late at night and you see a truck stop that seems out of place, a little too perfect, a little too inviting, keep driving. Don't stop. Don't look back. And whatever you do, don't make a deal. I've been driving trucks for 30 years, and I thought I'd seen it all. Lot lizards, highway robbers, UFOs, you name it. But what happened at the Starlight truck stop? That was something else entirely. Something that still keeps me up at night, even now. It was a sweltering August night, the kind where the air feels like a wet blanket wrapped around you. I'd been on the road for 14 hours straight, my eyes burning from the strain of watching endless white lines disappear under my rig. The GPS said the next town was still 60 miles away, but my eyelids were getting heavier by the minute. That's when I saw it, a neon sign piercing through the darkness like a beacon. Starlight Truck Stop, next exit. I'd never heard of it before, but at that point I didn't care. I just needed coffee and a chance to stretch my legs. I took the exit, the truck's wheels crunching on loose gravel as I pulled into the lot. The place looked like it had been plucked straight out of the 1950s, all chrome and neon with a gleaming silver diner attached to the gas station. Despite the late hour, every parking spot was filled with big rigs. Weird, I thought. You don't usually see this much traffic at 2 a.m. in the middle of nowhere. As I climbed down from my cab, that's when I heard it. A voice singing softly. It was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard, clear and sweet, like crystal wind chimes in a summer breeze. I couldn't make out the words, but something about the melody made my heart ache with a longing I couldn't explain. I looked around, trying to find the source of the music. There, sitting on a bench near the diner entrance, was a woman. Even from a distance, I could tell she was stunning. Long dark hair, pale skin that seemed to glow in the neon light, and eyes that sparkled like stars. She smiled at me, and my breath caught in my throat. Without even realizing it, I started walking towards her. The singing grew louder, filling my head until it was all I could hear. "Hello, traveler," she said as I approached, her voice just as melodious as her song. "You look weary. Why don't you sit with me a while?" I should have been suspicious. Should have wondered why this gorgeous woman was sitting alone at a truck stop in the middle of the night. But all I could think about was how badly I wanted to hear her sing again. I heard you singing," I managed to stammer. "It was beautiful." Her smile widened, showing teeth that seemed just a little too sharp. "Oh, you like that? I have so many more songs to share, songs that can take away all your cares, all your weariness. Would you like to hear them?" I nodded eagerly, sinking down onto the bench beside her. In the back of my mind, a small voice was screaming that something was wrong, but it was drowned out by the music that once again filled the air. She sang of far-off places, of adventures and treasures beyond imagining. With each note, I felt myself slipping deeper under her spell. The world around us seemed to fade away until there was nothing but her voice and those mesmerizing eyes. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in the music. It could have been minutes or hours. But suddenly, a hand grabbed my shoulder, shaking me roughly. "Wake up, buddy, you gotta wake up!" I blinked, the world slowly coming back into focus. An old man stood in front of me, his weathered face creased with concern. Of the woman, there was no sign. Where did she go?" I asked, my voice hoarse. The old man's expression darkened. "There was no she, son. You were sitting here alone, staring at nothing. If I hadn't come along..." He trailed off, glancing nervously at the other trucks in the lot. That's when I noticed something odd. Despite all the vehicles, there wasn't a single other person in sight. No drivers getting coffee, no attendant at the gas pumps, nothing. "What's going on here?" I demanded, standing up on shaky legs. "Where is everyone?" The old man grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "We need to leave now before she comes back." "Before who comes back? The woman who was singing?" He shook his head, already pulling me towards my truck. "That wasn't a woman, son. That was the siren. And if you'd listened much longer, you'd have ended up like all the rest." As we hurried across the lot, I finally noticed what I'd been too entranced to see before. The other trucks weren't just parked. They were abandoned, windows rolled down, doors left open, like the drivers had just walked away and never come back. What happens to them?" I asked, a cold dread settling in my stomach. The old man's voice was grim. "Nobody knows for sure, but every now and then you'll see one of them wandering down the highway, eyes blank, still humming that damn song. They don't talk, don't eat, just walk until they drop." We reached my rig and he all but shoved me towards the door. "Get in, drive. Don't stop until sunrise, you hear me? And whatever you do, don't listen if you hear singing." I climbed into the cab, my hands shaking as I turned the key. As the engine roared to life, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. The woman, the siren, was back, standing at the edge of the lot. Even from this distance, I could see her eyes glowing in the darkness. She opened her mouth, and the first notes of that haunting melody drifted towards me. My hand froze on the gear shift, my mind clouding over with the desire to go to her, to hear more of her song. The old man slammed his hand against the side of my truck. "Drive, damn you, drive!" His shout broke the spell. I threw the rig into gear and stomped on the gas. Gravel sprayed as I peeled out of the lot, not daring to look in my mirrors. I drove through the rest of the night, the old man's warnings echoing in my head. When the sun finally rose, I pulled into the first crowded truck stop I could find. Somewhere with lots of people, lots of noise, somewhere to drown out the memory of that song. But I couldn't escape it. Not really. In the weeks that followed, I heard it everywhere, in the hum of my engine, in the static between radio stations, in the wind whistling past my windows, always there, always calling. I started seeing things, too. Lone figures walking along the highway in the dead of night, their eyes vacant, their lips moving in a silent song. Once, at a red light, I swear I saw her reflection in my side mirror, smiling that too-sharp smile. I tried to tell people, other truckers, the police, even went to a psychiatrist once, but they all looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I am. Maybe that night broke something in my mind that can't be fixed. But I know what I heard, what I saw, and I know it's still out there waiting. I don't drive long haul anymore, switched to local routes, day trips only, anything to avoid those lonely night highways. But sometimes, when the sun is setting and the shadows are growing long, I feel the urge to get back on the road, to drive until I find that truck stop again, to hear just one more song. And that scares me more than anything. Because I know if I ever give in, if I ever hear that melody again, I won't be strong enough to resist. I'll become just another lost soul, wandering the highways, forever chasing a song I can never quite remember. So I stay close to home, surround myself with noise and people. And I warn every trucker I meet, if you're driving late at night and you see a truck stop that seems too good to be true, keep going. Don't stop. Don't look back. And whatever you do, don't listen to the song. The CB radio crackled to life, breaking the monotonous hum of my rig's engine. Breaker 1, 9, this is Night Owl. Any of you truckers heading towards Point Pleasant better watch yourselves. Strange things happening out there tonight. I hadn't planned on going anywhere near Point Pleasant. It was well past midnight, and I was hauling a load of electronics from Columbus to Charleston. But something in Night Owl's voice made me lean forward, my hand hovering over the radio's volume knob. "Night Owl, this is Big Red. What kind of strange we talking about?" There was a long pause before Night Owl's voice came back, quieter this time. "I don't rightly know, Big Red. Saw something that don't make no sense. Big as a man, but it weren't no man. Had wings, I tell you. And eyes that'll haunt me till the day I die." I felt a chill run down my spine. I'd been driving these roads for nigh on 20 years, and I'd heard my share of tall tales. But this was different. Night Owl wasn't some green rookie trying to make a name for himself. He was old school, reliable as they come. "Night Owl, you been dipping into that roadside moonshine again?" Another trucker chimed in, trying to lighten the mood. "I wish I had, Dusty. Might explain what I saw, but I'm stone cold sober, and I know what I seen." The conversation devolved into a mix of jokes and concerned queries, but I tuned it out. My eyes were fixed on the road ahead, where a blanket of fog was slowly creeping across the asphalt. It was as if the weather itself was conspiring to make this night even more eerie. I should have stuck to my original route, should have kept on rolling straight to Charleston. But curiosity got the better of me. I'd heard whispers about the Mothman for years. It was part of the local folklore, something to scare tourists and give the gift shops something to sell. But I'd never given it much thought. Until now. Before I knew it, I was taking the exit that would lead me towards Point Pleasant. The fog grew thicker with each mile until I could barely see 20 feet in front of my truck. I slowed to a crawl, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. That's when I saw it. A pair of red reflectors on the side of the road. Probably just some safety markers, I told myself. But as I drew closer, I realized they were too high up to be roadside reflectors, and they were moving. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision. When I opened my eyes again, the red dots were gone. Must be more tired than I thought, I reasoned, reaching for my thermos of coffee. But then I saw it again, this time directly in front of me. two glowing red orbs, floating about 7 feet off the ground. I slammed on the brakes, my trailer jackknifing behind me. The coffee spilled across my lap, but I barely noticed the scalding liquid soaking through my jeans, because now I could see it clearly. It was exactly as Night Owl had described, a massive winged figure, easily 7 feet tall. Its body was dark, almost black, blending into the night. But those eyes, those glowing red eyes seemed to stare right through me. I'm not ashamed to admit it, I froze. 20 years on the road, and I'd never seen anything like this. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. For a moment, everything was still. Me, the creature, even the fog seemed to hang motionless in the air. Then it moved. One moment it was standing in the middle of the road, the next it was right beside my driver's side window. I yelped, scrambling to lock the door even though I knew it already was. The creature's face was inches from mine, separated only by the glass. Its features were hard to make out in the darkness, but I could see a hint of a beak where a nose and mouth should be. Its wings unfurled, spanning wider than my truck. They weren't feathered like a bird's, but leathery like a bat's. The creature tilted its head, studying me. I had the unsettling feeling that it was reading my thoughts, peering into my very soul. I don't know how long we stayed like that, locked in a staring contest that I was terrified to break. Finally, slowly, I reached for the ignition. The creature's eyes followed my movement, but it didn't react. I turned the key and the engine roared to life. That seemed to break the spell. The creature, the Mothman, I realized with a jolt, spread its wings wide and lifted off the ground. The downdraft buffeted my truck, rocking it on its suspension. I watched, awestruck, as it rose into the air, those red eyes never leaving mine until it disappeared into the fog above. For a long moment I sat there, my hands shaking on the wheel. Part of me wanted to floor it, to put as much distance between me and this place as possible. But a larger part knew I couldn't leave. Not yet. I had to know more. I eased my rig back onto the road, driving slowly towards Point Pleasant. The fog seemed to part before me, as if guiding me towards the town. As I crossed the Silver Bridge into Point Pleasant, a sense of foreboding washed over me. Something wasn't right. The town should have been asleep at this hour, but there were lights on in many of the houses. As I pulled into the truck stop, I saw a group of people gathered near the entrance, talking in hushed, urgent tones. I parked my rig and climbed down, my legs still a bit shaky. As I approached the group, I caught snippets of their conversation. Never seen anything like it. Wings as wide as a house. Those eyes, Lord have mercy. An older man, his face lined with worry, turned to me. "You see it too, son?" I nodded, not trusting my voice just yet. The man, Jim, according to his name tag, let out a long sigh. "Been living here all my life, heard the stories, sure, but never believed them, not till tonight." What is it?" I finally managed to ask. Jim shook his head. "Folks around here call it the Mothman. Been sighting it off and on for years, but never like this. Never so many sightings in one night." A younger woman stepped forward, her eyes wide with fear. "My grandma used to say the Mothman only appears before great tragedy. Said it tried to warn people before the Silver Bridge collapsed back in '67. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the bridge I'd just crossed. You don't think—" Jim placed a comforting hand on the woman's shoulder. "Now, Sarah, let's not go jumping to conclusions. Could be anything bringing it out. Changes in the environment, maybe, or—" He was cut off by the sound of screeching tires. We all turned to see a police cruiser pull into the lot, lights flashing. The officer jumped out, his face pale. "Everyone needs to evacuate," he shouted. "They've found structural issues with the bridge. It could go at any moment." For a second, nobody moved. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, everyone burst into action. People ran for their cars, others for their phones to warn loved ones. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as Jim's words echoed in my head. The Mothman only appears before great tragedy. As chaos erupted around me, I couldn't help but think back to those glowing red eyes. Had it been trying to warn me, to warn all of us? I thought about how it had appeared in front of my truck, forcing me to stop. How it had stared at me, as if trying to communicate something of vital importance. The next few hours passed in a blur. I helped the locals evacuate, using my rig to transport those without vehicles to safe areas. All the while, I kept an eye on the sky, half expecting to see that winged figure appear again. It wasn't until dawn broke that we got the all clear. Engineers had worked through the night to stabilize the bridge. A tragedy had been averted thanks to an early warning. As I finally pulled out of Point Pleasant, my delivery now hopelessly late but my conscience clear, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd been part of something bigger than ourselves. The Mothman, whatever it was, had brought us together, had warned us of impending danger. I've been back on the road for a few weeks now. Life has largely returned to normal, but I'll never forget that night. Sometimes, when I'm driving late and the fog rolls in, I find myself scanning the sky, looking for those glowing red eyes. I used to think I knew everything there was to know about these roads. But that night in Point Pleasant taught me that there's more to this world than what we can easily explain. It taught me to keep an open mind and to pay attention to the warnings life sends us, no matter what form they might take. Now, every time I pass through West Virginia, I keep my radio tuned to the local chatter and my eyes peeled for any sign of those leathery wings. Because in this line of work, you never know what you might encounter on the long, dark road ahead. The desert night was as black as a raven's wing when I first heard the whispers. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on me, whistling through the canyon walls. But as I guided my 18-wheeler down the lonely stretch of Highway 160, cutting through the heart of Navajo Nation, I realized with growing unease that the sounds were keeping pace with my rig. I'd been driving this route for 15 years, and I'd seen my fair share of strange things. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to experience on that moonless night in the Four Corners. The CB radio had been quiet for hours, not unusual for this time of night in such a remote area. I was hauling a load of construction materials from Flagstaff to Shiprock, a run I'd done countless times before. But something felt different this time. The air seemed heavier, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. I rolled down my window, hoping the cool night air would help keep me alert. That's when I first caught a whiff of something off. It wasn't the usual smell of sage and dust that permeated this part of the country. This was something musky, almost rotten, like wet dog mixed with decay. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel as I peered into the darkness beyond my headlights. The road stretched endlessly before me, bordered on both sides by towering mesas and twisted juniper trees. In the daytime, it was a breathtaking landscape, but at night, those same formations cast deep shadows that seemed to move and shift in ways that defied explanation. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement in my side mirror. I jerked my head around, but there was nothing there. Just the empty road behind me disappearing into the night. "Get a grip, old man," I muttered to myself, shaking my head. I'd been on the road too long. My mind was playing tricks on me. I reached for my thermos, hoping a slug of strong coffee would chase away the shadows, but as I lifted the thermos to my lips, I saw it again. This time it wasn't just a flicker. There was something keeping pace with my truck, just at the edge of my headlight's reach. Something that ran on two legs but moved with an unnatural, loping gait. My blood ran cold. I'd heard stories, of course. Every trucker who ran this route had. Tales of the skinwalker, the shape-shifting witch of Navajo legend. But I'd always dismissed them as campfire stories meant to spook greenhorn drivers. Now, faced with the impossible sight before me, those stories came rushing back. I remembered the warnings. Don't look directly at it, don't slow down, and whatever you do, don't let it know you've seen it. I forced my eyes back to the road, my hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel. But I couldn't help stealing glances in my mirror. The figure was still there, matching my speed exactly. In the brief flashes I allowed myself, I could make out more details. It was tall, much taller than a man, with limbs that seemed too long and joints that bent in impossible ways. Its skin, where visible, was a patchwork of fur and scales, as if it couldn't decide what form to take. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. Maybe I'd fallen asleep at the wheel. Maybe this was all some vivid hallucination brought on by too many hours on the road and not enough rest. But the smell, that putrid, rotting odor, was stronger now, seeping into my cab despite the rush of wind from my open window. This was no dream. This was happening. I pressed down on the accelerator, urging my rig to go faster. The engine roared in protest, but I didn't care. I had to get away from whatever this thing was. For a moment I thought it had worked. The figure fell behind, disappearing from my mirror. I let out a shaky breath, daring to hope that the nightmare was over. Then I heard it. a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my days. It was a laugh, but not like any laugh I'd ever heard before. It was high and cruel, somewhere between a hyena's cackle and a woman's scream, and it was coming from right above me. I looked up through the windshield and my heart nearly stopped. There, clinging to the top of my cab, was a face, but it wasn't a human face. The features were constantly shifting, morphing from human to animal and back again. The only constant were the eyes, pitch black without iris or pupil, and filled with a hunger that chilled me to my core. I did the only thing I could think of. I slammed on the brakes. The sudden deceleration sent my rig into a skid, the trailer fishtailing behind me. I fought the wheel, trying desperately to keep control as my tires screamed against the asphalt. There was a thud and a screech of claws on metal as the thing on my cab was thrown clear. I caught a glimpse of it tumbling across the road in my headlights, its form twisting and changing as it rolled. I didn't wait to see if it would get up. The moment I had my truck under control, I floored it. The engine whined in protest, but I pushed it for every ounce of speed it could give me. Miles flew by in a blur. I didn't dare slow down, didn't dare look in my mirrors. My only thought was to put as much distance between me and that thing as possible. It wasn't until I saw the lights of Shiprock in the distance that I finally eased off the gas. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep them on the wheel. Sweat had soaked through my shirt, and my heart was still pounding like a jackhammer in my chest. I pulled into the first truck stop I saw, nearly colliding with a parked rig in my haste. As soon as I cut the engine, the silence hit me like a physical force. For a long moment, I just sat there trying to process what had happened. Slowly, mechanically, I climbed down from my cab on unsteady legs. I needed to see, needed to know if there was any evidence of what I'd experienced or if I'd truly lost my mind out there in the desert night. The pre-dawn light was just starting to creep over the horizon as I walked around my rig. At first, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. No dents, no scratches, nothing to suggest the impossibility I'd witnessed. But then I reached the back of the trailer. There, scored deep into the metal, were 4 parallel gashes, claw marks unmistakably large and spaced too wide to belong to any natural animal. My legs gave out and I sank to the ground, my back against my truck's tires. It had been real. All of it had been real. I don't know how long I sat there staring at those claw marks as the sun slowly rose. It wasn't until I heard the sound of another truck pulling in that I finally stirred. An old Navajo man climbed down from the cab, his face weathered by years on the road. He took one look at me, then at the claw marks on my trailer, and his expression grew grave. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low and serious. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He sighed, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small leather pouch. "Here," he said, pressing it into my hand. "Blessing powder. Keep it with you. It won't stop the skinwalker, but it might slow it down if you ever encounter it again." I looked at the pouch, then back at the old man. "Again?" I croaked. He nodded solemnly. "Once a skinwalker has your scent, it doesn't forget. Be careful out there, especially at night, and whatever you do, don't speak its name. Names have power." With that cryptic warning, he turned and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the weight of the pouch in my hand. I'd love to say that was the end of it, that I quit driving or at least quit this route. But the truth is, trucking is in my blood. It's all I know. So I'm still out here, still running loads through Navajo Nation. But things are different now. I don't drive at night anymore, not through this stretch. And that pouch of blessing powder, it never leaves my side. Sometimes on long hauls, I find myself scanning the shadows at the edge of the road. And every now and then, when the wind is just right, I catch a whiff of that rotten, musky smell. When that happens, I grip the wheel a little tighter, press the accelerator a little harder, and silently thank that old Navajo driver for his gift. Because out here in the desert night, where the old ways still hold sway, you never know what might be lurking just beyond the reach of your headlights. And once you've seen what I've seen, you never forget that the line between our world and the world of legend is thinner than we'd like to believe. The first thing you should know is that hunger can drive a man to madness. The second thing is that some legends are better left as just that, legends. I learned both these lessons the hard way on a godforsaken stretch of the Trans-Canada Highway, where the wilderness of northern Ontario seems to swallow everything whole, including reason and sanity. It was late January, and I'd been on the road for what felt like an eternity. The cab of my Peterbilt had become my whole world, a metal cocoon against the relentless Canadian winter that raged outside. I was hauling a load of industrial equipment from Toronto to Thunder Bay, a route I'd driven 100 times before. But this time was different. This time, the blizzard hit. I'd heard the warnings on the radio, of course, but like any trucker worth his salt, I figured I could outrun it. Mother Nature, it turned out, had other plans. The snow started light enough, just a few flakes dancing in my headlights. Within an hour, it was a full-blown whiteout. The world beyond my windshield had vanished, replaced by a swirling vortex of white. I could barely see the hood of my truck, let alone the road. That's when I made my first mistake. Instead of pulling over and waiting it out, I pressed on. I had a deadline to meet, and I'd be damned if a little snow was going to stop me. Little did I know, that decision would lead me into the maw of something far worse than any storm. The hours crawled by, each one colder and darker than the last. My GPS had gone haywire, the screen showing nothing but static. The radio was dead, nothing but a low, eerie hum no matter what frequency I tried. It was as if the storm had cut me off from the rest of the world entirely. It was nearing midnight when I saw the first sign of life I'd encountered in hours, a dim light in the distance, barely visible through the curtain of snow. Hope surged through me. Maybe it was a rest stop, or at least some kind of shelter where I could wait out the worst of the storm. As I drew closer, I realized it wasn't a building at all, but a figure. A person, standing stock still in the middle of the highway, holding what looked like an old oil lantern. I laid on the horn, but the figure didn't move. Cursing, I downshifted and hit the brakes, my trailer fishtailing dangerously on the icy road. I managed to bring the rig to a stop mere feet from the stranger. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The figure just stood there, the lantern casting strange, elongated shadows across the snow. Then slowly it turned to face me. I wish I could say I saw a face. What I saw instead has haunted my nightmares ever since. Where a human face should have been was a skull. Not bare bone, but something that looked like it had been stretched over a skull. Skin pulled too tight, features distorted into a grotesque parody of humanity. I blinked hard, sure I was seeing things. When I opened my eyes again, the skull face was gone. In its place was an old man, his face weathered and lined, eyes sunken deep in their sockets. He gestured for me to roll down my window. Against my better judgment, I did. The cold hit me like a physical force, along with a smell I can only describe as decay and hunger. "You shouldn't be out here," the old man said, his voice a dry rasp that seemed to blend with the howling wind. "It's not safe. He's hunting tonight." "Who's hunting?" I asked, a chill that had nothing to do with the cold running down my spine. The old man's eyes widened, and for a moment I swore I saw that skull face again, superimposed over his features. "The Wendigo," he whispered. "It's always hungry. And tonight it feasts." Before I could respond, he was gone. Not like he'd walked away, but like he'd simply ceased to exist. One moment he was there, the next, nothing but swirling snow where he'd stood. I sat there for a long moment, my hands shaking on the wheel. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as a hallucination, a trick of the storm and too many hours on the road. But deep in my gut, I knew what I'd seen was real. I should have stopped there, should have battened down the hatches and waited for daylight. But the old man's warning had shaken me, and I convinced myself that pushing on was safer than sitting still. That was my second mistake. I don't know how long I drove after that. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the howling white void outside. My fuel gauge was dropping steadily, and I knew I'd have to find somewhere to stop soon, Wendigo or no Wendigo. That's when I saw the lights ahead. Not the eerie glow of the old man's lantern this time, but the warm, welcoming lights of what looked like a small town. Relief flooded through me. Civilization at last. As I pulled into what passed for the town's main street, I felt a nagging sense of unease. The place looked wrong somehow. The buildings were oddly angular, their proportions subtly off in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on. And despite the lights in every window, there wasn't a soul to be seen. I parked my rig in front of what looked like a diner, the neon open sign buzzing in the window. The moment I cut the engine, the silence hit me like a physical force. The storm, which had been a constant roar for hours, had suddenly stopped. The quiet was absolute, oppressive. My boots crunched in the fresh snow as I made my way to the diner's door. It swung open easily, a little bell tinkling overhead. The inside was warm and brightly lit, the counter lined with red vinyl stools, booths along the walls. It looked like every other small-town diner I'd ever been in, except for one thing: it was completely empty. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. No response. I made my way to the counter, my unease growing with every step. There was a plate of food sitting there, steam still rising from it. A half-empty cup of coffee sat beside it, the liquid still swirling slightly as if it had just been set down. That's when I noticed the smell. That same odor of decay and hunger I'd caught a whiff of earlier, but stronger now, much stronger. I turned to leave, my heart pounding in my chest. But as I reached for the door, I caught a glimpse of movement in the reflection of the glass. Something was behind me. I spun around and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The diner was gone. In its place was a vast, cavernous space, the walls dripping with something that looked unsettlingly like melted flesh. And there, in the center of it all, stood a figure that defied description. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs too long and jointed in too many places. Its skin was a patchwork of fur and scales and things I have no words for, but its face, its face, a skull just like I'd seen before, but massive, with antlers that scraped the ceiling. And its eyes, black bottomless pits that seemed to draw me in, promising an eternity of hunger and madness. I knew in that moment that I was looking at the Wendigo, and I knew that it was looking back at me. It moved towards me with a speed that belied its size, covering the distance between us in the blink of an eye. I felt its breath on my face, reeking of carrion and despair. Its jaws opened, revealing row upon row of needle-sharp teeth. In that moment, staring into the maw of the beast, I was certain I was going to die, but some primal instinct for survival kicked in. My hand went to my pocket, where I'd absent-mindedly stuffed a packet of beef jerky earlier in the day. Without thinking, I tore it open and threw the contents at the creature. The effect was instantaneous. He recoiled as if I'd thrown holy water on a demon. It let out a shriek that shook the very foundations of wherever we were, a sound of fury and frustration. I didn't wait to find out more. I turned and ran, bursting out of the Knot Diner and into the night. The storm had returned, the wind howling with renewed fury. I scrambled into my truck, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life and I floored it, not caring where I was going as long as it was away from here. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of the town. It was melting, for lack of a better word, the buildings collapsing in on themselves like candle wax. I drove through the night, pushing my rig to its limits. It wasn't until the first rays of dawn began to peek over the horizon that I finally allowed myself to slow down. I found myself on a stretch of highway I recognized not far from Thunder Bay. Somehow I'd made it through. As the adrenaline began to wear off, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Had it all been some kind of hallucination? A waking nightmare brought on by exhaustion and the unforgiving winter? But then I caught a whiff of that smell, decay and hunger clinging to my clothes. And I knew it had been real, all of it. I made my delivery in Thunder Bay, but that was my last long haul through northern Ontario. These days I stick to shorter routes, and I don't drive at night if I can help it. And I always keep a packet of jerky in my pocket, just in case. Because out there in the vast Canadian wilderness, where the night seems endless and the cold can drive a man to madness, there are things that hunger. Things that were once men, before desperation and isolation twisted them into monsters. Things that are always hunting, always hungry. And sometimes, just sometimes, they find their way into our world, drawn by the warmth and life they lost long ago. So if you're ever driving those lonely highways and you see lights where no town should be, or a figure standing in the road on a stormy night, remember my story. The Michigan night was thick as molasses and twice as dark. I'd been hauling steel from Detroit to Marquette for the better part of a decade, but I'd never seen the forests quite so alive. That's the only word for it, though it doesn't do justice to the creeping unease that had been building in my gut since I'd crossed into the Upper Peninsula. It was just past midnight when I heard the first howl. Now I'm no stranger to the sounds of the wild. Wolves, coyotes, the odd bear. I've heard them all in my years on the road, but this was different. It started low, almost subsonic, vibrating through my rig like a freight train. Then it rose, climbing to a pitch that set my teeth on edge and made the hairs on the back of my neck stand at attention. I white-knuckled the steering wheel, my eyes darting between the road ahead and the inky blackness of the forest pressing in on both sides. The two-lane highway stretched out before me, an asphalt ribbon cutting through the wilderness. My headlights seemed feeble against the oppressive darkness, barely illuminating a few yards ahead. That's when I saw it. A pair of eyes reflecting in my high beams. Not the usual pinpricks you'd expect from a deer or raccoon. These were massive glowing orbs set too high off the ground to belong to any normal animal, and they were keeping pace with my truck. I blinked hard, certain I was seeing things. 70 miles an hour, and whatever this was, it was matching my speed stride for stride. The CB radio crackled to life, making me jump. Breaker 1, 9, this is Night Owl. Any of you boys seeing anything strange out there tonight? I hesitated, my hand hovering over the mic. Part of me was afraid that if I admitted what I was seeing, it would somehow make it real. But the tremor in Night Owl's voice told me he'd seen something too. This is Big Red, I replied, my own voice sounding strange in my ears. If by strange you mean something big running alongside the road, then yeah, I'm seeing it. There was a long pause before Night Owl came back. Glad I'm not the only one. Thought I was losing my mind. You ever heard of the Michigan Dog Man, Red? I felt a chill run down my spine. Everyone who'd driven this route had heard the stories. A creature, half man, half wolf, standing 7 feet tall on its hind legs. Most dismissed it as local legend, a boogeyman to scare tourists and keep kids in line. But there were those who swore they'd seen it, their eyes wide with a fear that couldn't be faked. It's just stories, Owl, I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. Ain't no such thing as... My words died in my throat as the thing keeping pace with my truck suddenly veered towards the road. In the split second it was illuminated by my headlights, I saw it clearly. It ran on all fours, but its body was all wrong for a wolf or a bear. The torso was too long, the limbs jointed in ways that defied nature, and its face, God help me, its face was a nightmarish blend of human and canine features, with a muzzle full of teeth that gleamed wickedly in the light. I jerked the wheel hard, the truck swerving dangerously as I tried to avoid the creature. My trailer fishtailed, threatening to jackknife. For a heart-stopping moment, I was sure I was going to flip. But years of experience took over, my hands moving almost on autopilot to bring the rig back under control. When I'd steadied the truck, the creature was gone. But the night was filled with that bone-chilling howl again, closer this time. Much closer. Red? Red, you still there? Night Owl's voice came through the static, thick with concern. Yeah, I managed, my heart hammering in my chest. Yeah, I'm here. But I think it's real, Owl, the dog man. I think it's real, and I think it's hunting us. Jesus, Mary and Joseph, Owl breathed. Where are you? I glanced at my GPS, then swore softly. The screen was nothing but static. I don't know exactly, somewhere north of Grayling. My GPS is on the fritz. Mine too, Owl replied. Listen, there's a truck stop about 20 miles up the road. Sawyer's. You know it? I nodded, forgetting for a moment he couldn't see me. Yeah, I know it. Meet me there, safety in numbers, right? I agreed, and Owl signed off. The silence that followed was oppressive, broken only by the hum of my engine and the pounding of my heart. The next 20 miles were the longest of my life. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle in the underbrush along the road made me flinch. Twice more I caught glimpses of those glowing eyes in my mirrors, always just at the edge of my vision. When the lights of Sawyer's finally came into view, I nearly wept with relief. I pulled into the lot, brakes hissing as I brought the rig to a stop. Night Owl's truck was already there, parked under one of the few functioning lights. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, trying to steady my nerves. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. Sawyer's was usually bustling, even at this hour, but now, nothing. No idling trucks, no chatter from the diner, just an eerie silence that seemed to press in from all sides. Slowly, I climbed down from my cab, my legs shaky beneath me. The lot was empty save for Owl's truck and mine. The diner's windows were dark, the gas pumps shut down. It was as if the place had been abandoned. Owl? I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. You there, buddy? No response. I made my way to his truck, my hand instinctively going to the small of my back where I kept a pistol tucked away. I'd always thought of it as insurance against hijackers or lot lizards with bad intentions. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd be considering using it against whatever this was. As I approached Owl's rig, I saw his door was ajar. "Owl?" I called again, softer this time. Still nothing. I reached the driver's side and peered in, dreading what I might find. The cab was empty, but there were signs of a struggle. The seat was torn, deep gouges in the leather that no human nails could have made, and there on the dashboard was a smear of something dark and wet. I didn't need to touch it to know it was blood. A low growl from behind me froze me in place. Slowly, every instinct screaming at me to run, I turned around. It stood on two legs at the edge of the lot, its massive form silhouetted against the tree line. In the dim light from the solitary lamp, I could make out details I wished I couldn't. The powerful canine legs, the hunched shoulders bristling with coarse fur, the hands because they were hands, not paws, ending in cruel curved claws, and the head, a wolf's head but larger, with eyes that glowed with an unnatural intelligence. For a long moment, we stared at each other. I could hear my blood rushing in my ears, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The creature's chest heaved, steam rising from its muzzle in the cool night air. Then it howled. It was the same sound I'd heard earlier, but up close it was devastating. I clapped my hands over my ears, pain lancing through my head. The sound seemed to go on forever, echoing off the empty buildings and the surrounding forest. When it stopped, the silence that followed was somehow even worse. I knew, with a certainty that went beyond rational thought, that it was about to charge. In that moment, time seemed to slow. I saw everything with a clarity that was almost surreal. The way the creature's muscles bunched as it prepared to lunge, the glint of its teeth in the lamplight, the utter alienness of its eyes filled with a hunger that went beyond the physical. My hand moved of its own accord, drawing my pistol. I fired, the muzzle flash momentarily blinding me. The creature jerked, a spot of darkness blossoming on its chest. But it didn't go down. Instead, it roared, a sound of rage and pain that shook me to my core. I fired again and again, emptying the clip. Each shot found its mark, but the dogman kept coming. It was on me in 3 massive strides, its claws raking across my chest. Pain exploded through me as I was thrown back, slamming into the side of Owl's truck. I slumped to the ground, my vision swimming. The creature loomed over me, its hot breath washing over my face. This was it, I thought. This was how I was going to die. But then miraculously it hesitated, its head cocked to one side as if listening to something I couldn't hear. And then, with one last soul-shattering howl, it turned and loped off into the forest, leaving me bleeding and broken in the empty lot. I don't know how long I lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness. The next thing I clearly remember is the wail of sirens, the lot suddenly flooded with the flashing lights of police cars and an ambulance. They found me, but they never found Night Owl. The official report cited an animal attack, probably a bear. They said I was lucky to be alive, that my injuries were consistent with a large predator, but they didn't believe me when I told them what I'd seen. It's been years since that night, and I haven't driven a truck since. I can't bring myself to get behind the wheel, knowing what's out there in the dark. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I think I can hear that howl in the distance, and I wonder, is it still out there? Still hunting? And I pray for those lonely drivers on the midnight roads of Michigan, unaware of the ancient predator that stalks the forests. Because the dogman is real, and it's always hungry. They say the worst sound a trucker can hear is silence, but I'm here to tell you that's not true. The worst sound is a knock on your cabin door in the middle of nowhere, when you know damn well there shouldn't be anyone else around for miles. I'd been driving for Horizon Logistics for the better part of a decade, hauling everything from produce to car parts across the lower 48. But it was a crisp October night in Northern California that changed everything. A night that started like any other, but ended with me questioning everything I thought I knew about the world. The dispatch had me running a load of electronics from San Francisco to Seattle. It was a route I'd done 100 times before, a straight shot up I-5 that I could probably drive in my sleep. Not that I ever would, mind you. A lot of guys get cocky, think they're invincible behind the wheel. But 18 wheels and 80,000 pounds of steel and cargo have a way of keeping you humble. I'd left the Bay Area just after sunset, figuring I'd make it to Redding before calling it a night. The cab of my Peterbilt was my second home, more familiar to me than my actual house some days. The hum of the engine, the gentle sway of the truck, it was all as natural as breathing. As I pushed north, the urban sprawl gave way to rolling hills, then to the towering redwoods that give this part of the country its name. The forest pressed in close on both sides of the highway, creating a tunnel of green that seemed to swallow up the night. It was nearing midnight when I started feeling the fatigue creeping in. My eyes were getting heavy, and I caught myself drifting more than once. That's when I spotted the turnout ahead, a wide shoulder carved into the hillside, big enough for a couple of rigs to park overnight. I'd used this spot before. It wasn't an official rest area, but it was well known among us long haulers as a safe place to catch some shut-eye. I eased my rig onto the gravel, the air brakes hissing as I brought her to a stop. For a moment I just sat there, letting the engine idle. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a wall of trees at the edge of the turnout. The forest seemed alive in a way it hadn't from the road, the branches swaying gently in a breeze I couldn't feel. I killed the engine and was immediately enveloped in silence. It was the kind of quiet you only get miles from civilization, so complete it almost has a weight to it. I could hear my own heartbeat, the blood rushing in my ears. I did my usual checks, making sure the doors were locked, the alarm was set. Then I climbed into the sleeper cab, ready to grab a few hours of rest before hitting the road again. I'm not sure how long I'd been asleep when it happened. It could have been minutes, could have been hours. But I was jolted awake by a sound that had no business being there, a knock on my cabin door. At first I thought I'd dreamed it. I lay there in the dark, my heart pounding, straining my ears. Then it came again, 3 sharp raps, clear as day. Now let me tell you something about truckers. We're a cautious bunch by nature. You don't last long in this business if you're not. So when you hear a knock on your door in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, your first instinct isn't to answer. It's to reach for whatever weapon you've got handy. I eased myself up, moving as quietly as I could. My hand found the heavy maglite I keep by the bed. Not much as far as weapons go, but it could do some damage if needed. The knock came again, more insistent this time, and then impossibly a voice. "Hello, is anyone in there? I need help!" It was a man's voice, young-sounding and tinged with panic. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to ignore it, to wait until whoever it was went away. But there was something in that voice, a desperation that tugged at me. Slowly, cautiously, I made my way to the front of the cab. The windshield was fogged up, but I could make out a figure standing by the passenger door. In the dim moonlight, it looked like a young man, maybe in his 20s. He was wearing what looked like hiking gear, a backpack slung over one shoulder. "Please," he called out again. "My friend is hurt. We need help." I hesitated, my hand on the door lock. In all my years on the road, I'd never encountered anything like this. But if someone really was hurt, against my better judgment, I cracked the window an inch. "What happened?" I called out. The young man's face lit up with relief. "Oh, thank God. We were hiking and my friend fell. I think he broke his leg. We've been trying to find help for hours." It sounded plausible enough. This area was popular with hikers and campers. And if someone really was hurt out there, I made a decision. "All right," I said. "I've got a first aid kit. Let me get it and I'll come out." The young man nodded eagerly. Thank you so much." I grabbed the first aid kit from under the seat and after a moment's hesitation tucked my maglite into my belt. Can't be too careful after all. As I opened the door and stepped down from the cab, the cool night air hit me like a slap in the face. The young man stood a few feet away, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Where's your friend?" I asked, glancing around. The turnout was empty save for my truck. "Just over there," the young man said, pointing towards the tree line. He couldn't make it this far. I frowned. Something didn't feel right. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up, a primal warning signal I'd learned to trust over the years. "Why don't you bring him here?" I suggested. "It'll be easier to treat him in the light." The young man's face changed then in a way that sent a chill down my spine. His eager, panicked expression melted away, replaced by something hungry. "Oh," he said, his voice suddenly deeper, rougher. "But that would spoil the fun." I took a step back, my hand going to the maglite. But before I could draw it, the young man changed. It happened so fast I could barely process it. One moment he was standing there, the next he was growing, his body elongated, limbs stretching to impossible lengths. Fur sprouted from his skin, coarse and dark. His face elongated into a muzzle filled with teeth that gleamed in the moonlight. Where the young man had stood, there was now a creature straight out of a nightmare. It towered over me, easily 8 feet tall, with powerful limbs that ended in wicked claws. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural intelligence, fixed on me with predatory focus. I stumbled back, my back hitting the side of my truck. The creature, because I couldn't think of it as a man anymore, let out a sound that was half laugh, half growl. "You humans," it said, its voice a guttural rumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "So eager to help, so easy to lure." I wanted to run, to scream, to do something, but I was frozen in place, my mind unable to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew about the world. The creature took a step towards me, its claws leaving deep gouges in the gravel. "Don't worry," it growled. "I'll make it quick. I'm not cruel after all, just hungry." That broke my paralysis. With a yell that was equal parts terror and defiance, I swung the mag light with all my might. It connected with the creature's muzzle with a satisfying crack, sending it reeling back. I didn't wait to see if I'd done any real damage. I scrambled back into my cab, slamming the door and fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life just as the creature recovered, lunging at the truck with a roar of fury. Its claws raked across the door, leaving deep gashes in the metal. But the Peterbilt held, her sturdy frame my sanctuary against the nightmare outside. I threw the truck into gear and floored it, gravel spraying as I peeled out of the turnout. In my rearview mirror, I could see the creature shrinking into the distance, its glowing eyes fixed on me until the forest swallowed it up. I drove through the night, my hands shaking on the wheel, my mind reeling from what I'd seen. I didn't stop until I reached Reading, pulling into a crowded truck stop where the bright lights and presence of other people helped chase away the lingering terror. As the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as a vivid nightmare, a product of too many hours on the road and not enough sleep. But the deep scratches on my truck's door told a different story. A story of a world where the line between reality and legend is thinner than we'd like to believe. I'm still driving, still hauling loads up and down the West Coast. But I don't stop at that turnout anymore. And on dark nights, when the forest presses close and the shadows seem to move, I keep my foot heavy on the gas and my eyes on the road ahead. Because out there in the wilderness, where the old forests guard their secrets, there are things that hunger, things that wear human faces to lure in the unwary. And sometimes, just sometimes, they come knocking in the night. The first rule of trucking is simple: keep your eyes on the road. The second rule: don't stop for hitchhikers. But on a moonless night in the heart of Michigan, I broke both those rules. And I've been paying for it ever since. My name's Jack, and I've been hauling freight across the Midwest for the better part of 2 decades. I thought I'd seen it all. Blizzards that could bury a semi, fog so thick you could cut it with a knife, and summer storms that turned highways into rivers. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what I encountered on that godforsaken stretch of US 23. It was late October, that time of year when the trees are on fire with autumn colors and there's a bite in the air that warns of the winter to come. I was running a load of auto parts from Detroit to Flint, a route I'd driven so many times I could probably do it blindfolded. Not that I ever would, mind you. 80,000 pounds of steel and cargo tends to keep you humble. The night was unusually dark, clouds obscuring any hint of moonlight. My headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness, the beams catching the occasional reflection of a deer's eyes in the undergrowth along the roadside. The radio was tuned to a late-night talk show, the host's voice a low murmur that helped keep the loneliness at bay. I just passed the exit for Brighton when I saw it, a figure on the side of the road, arm outstretched in the universal gesture of a hitchhiker. Now, normally I wouldn't even consider stopping. Like I said, it's one of the cardinal rules of trucking. But something about this figure made me pause. As I drew closer, I could make out more details. It wasn't one person, but several. A family by the looks of it. A man, a woman, and what seemed to be 2 children. They were huddled together against the cold, their clothes looking worse for wear. Before I knew what I was doing, I was easing my rig onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under my tires as I came to a stop. I lowered my window, cool night air rushing in to replace the warmth of the cab. "You folks all right?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet night. The man stepped forward, relief evident on his face, even in the dim light. "Oh, thank God," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Our car broke down a few miles back. We've been walking for hours." I hesitated for a moment, years of ingrained caution warring with my desire to help. But looking at those kids, shivering in the cold, I couldn't just leave them there. "Hop in," I said, gesturing to the passenger side. "I can take you as far as Flint." The gratitude on their faces was palpable as they climbed into the cab. The woman and children squeezed into the sleeper berth while the man took the passenger seat. As we pulled back onto the highway, I could feel the tension in the air start to ease. "I'm Jack," I said, breaking the silence. "What brings you folks out this way?" The man, Tom, he said his name was, launched into a story about visiting family in Detroit, the breakdown of their old station wagon, the long walk in the dark. It all sounded perfectly reasonable, but something nagged at the back of my mind. Maybe it was the way his wife and kids remained utterly silent, or how Tom's eyes seemed to reflect the light a little too brightly. We'd been driving for about 20 minutes when I noticed the temperature in the cab was dropping. I fiddled with the heater, but it was blowing full blast. Confused, I glanced over at Tom, only to find him staring at me with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Tom's face split into a grin that was just a little too wide, a little too sharp. "Oh, everything's just fine, Jack," he said, his voice suddenly deeper, rougher. "In fact, things are about to get real interesting." That's when I heard it, a low growl coming from the sleeper berth. I risked a glance in the rearview mirror and felt my blood turn to ice. Where the woman and children had been, there were now shapes. Dark, twisted forms that seemed to writhe and shift in ways that defied natural law. I turned back to Tom, only to find that he too was changing. His skin seemed to ripple and flow, features elongating into something canine. His eyes glowed with an eerie greenish light. "What the hell are you?" I gasped, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. The thing that had been Tom let out a laugh that was more howl than human. "We're the reason your kind tells stories around campfires," it growled. "We're the shadows in the woods, the howl in the night. We're the Michigan dogmen, and you, my friend, are our ride to fresh hunting grounds." My mind reeled, trying to process what I was seeing, what I was hearing. Dogmen? The creatures of campfire stories and local legends? It couldn't be real, and yet the evidence was right there in my cab, grinning at me with too many teeth. I did the only thing I could think of. I slammed on the brakes. The sudden deceleration sent the creature in the passenger seat lurching forward, its head cracking against the dashboard. The shapes in the back tumbled together in a tangle of limbs and snarls. Taking advantage of their momentary disorientation, I yanked the door open and tumbled out onto the highway. The cold asphalt scraped my palms as I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I ran, not daring to look back. The sound of tearing metal reached my ears, followed by howls that chilled me to my very core. They were coming. Ahead, I could see the lights of a rest area. If I could just make it there, where there were people, lights, some semblance of civilization. My lungs burned as I pushed myself harder than I ever had before. The howls were getting closer. I could hear the scratch of claws on pavement, the heavy breathing of predators on the hunt. Just as I thought my legs would give out, I burst into the fluorescent glow of the rest area. A few bleary-eyed travelers looked up in surprise as I stumbled into the building, gasping for breath. "Call the police," I managed to choke out. There's something out there." But when the state troopers arrived, they found nothing. My truck was where I'd left it, the doors torn off their hinges, deep claw marks gouged into the metal. But of the dogmen, there was no sign. The official report cited an animal attack, probably a bear. They said I was lucky to be alive, that my hallucinations were likely the result of shock and exhaustion. But they didn't believe me when I told them what I'd seen. It's been years since that night, and I haven't driven a truck since. I can't bring myself to get behind the wheel knowing what's out there in the dark. Sometimes on quiet nights, I think I can hear howls in the distance, and I wonder, are they still out there? Still hunting? I've spent countless hours researching, trying to make sense of what happened. I found others who've had similar encounters, stories of shape-shifting creatures, of monsters that wear human faces to lure in the unwary. Some call them skinwalkers, others wendigos, but I know them as the Michigan Dogmen. Most folks dismiss these tales as urban legends, campfire stories meant to scare kids and tourists. But I know the truth. I've seen it with my own eyes, felt the chill of their presence, heard their inhuman howls. So if you're ever driving through Michigan on a dark night and you see a family stranded on the side of the road, think twice before you stop. Because not all hitchhikers are looking for a ride to the next town. Some are looking for their next meal. And in the wilds of Michigan, where the forests are deep and the nights are long, there are hunters that wear human faces, waiting for unwary travelers to let down their guard. Remember my story. Keep your doors locked, your eyes on the road, and your foot heavy on the gas. Because the Michigan Dogmen are real. And they're always hungry. The blizzard came out of nowhere, turning the mountain pass into a white hell. But that wasn't the worst of it. No, the real nightmare was what I saw in my headlights, a creature that shouldn't exist, something that made me question everything I thought I knew about the world. I've been driving big rigs for over 2 decades, and I thought I'd seen it all. Lot lizards, highway bandits, you name it. But nothing could have prepared me for that night in the Rockies. It was late January, and I was hauling a load of electronics from Denver to Seattle. The weather report had mentioned some snow, but nothing major. I figured I'd push through and make it over the pass before things got dicey. Big mistake. The first few flakes started falling as the sun dipped below the horizon. By the time I hit the steeper grades, it was coming down in sheets. The wipers were going full tilt, but they could barely keep up. My knuckles were white on the wheel as I crept along at maybe 15 miles an hour, peering into the swirling darkness. I should have pulled over, found somewhere to wait it out. But deadlines are deadlines, and I've always prided myself on making my deliveries on time. So I kept going, inch by agonizing inch, up that winding mountain road. The CB radio had gone quiet hours ago. It was just me, the howling wind, and the occasional crackle of my chains biting into the fresh powder. The temperature gauge on the dash was dropping fast. It was well below zero out there. I just rounded a particularly nasty bend when I saw it. At first I thought it was just another snowdrift, but then it moved. My heart nearly stopped as my high beams hit something. It was tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet and rail thin. For a split second I could have sworn it was just a person. But people don't have antlers, and they sure as hell don't have skin that looks like it's stretched too tight over their bones, all gray and mottled like old leather. The thing turned and looked right at me. Its eyes caught the light and gleamed like 2 embers in the night. The face, Jesus, I'll never forget that face. It was vaguely human, but all wrong. The jaw was too long, filled with teeth like jagged icicles. And the smell that suddenly filled my cab, it was like rotting meat and wet fur. I slammed on the brakes instinctively, but on that slick road, it was a mistake. The trailer started to jackknife, and I felt the sickening lurch as my world tilted sideways. I was certain I was going over the edge, about to become another statistic on this godforsaken mountain. But somehow I managed to wrestle the rig back under control. When I looked back up, the creature was gone, just vanished into the whiteout like it had never been there. I sat there for a long time, engine idling, trying to convince myself that I hadn't seen what I'd seen. It was just the storm playing tricks on my eyes, right? Maybe I dozed off for a second, had some kind of waking nightmare, but deep down I knew. I'd seen something that night, something that wasn't supposed to exist. With shaking hands, I put the truck in gear and started moving again. Every shadow looked like a monster now, every snow-laden tree branch a grasping claw. I've never been so happy to see the lights of a town as I was when I finally crested that pass and started the descent. I pulled into the first truck stop I saw and parked, my legs barely able to support me as I climbed down from the cab. The girl at the counter took one look at my face and asked if I was okay. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. In a way, I guess I had. I called my dispatcher and told him I was taking a break, weather delay. He wasn't happy, but I didn't care. I needed time to process what had happened. As I sat in that fluorescent-lit diner nursing a cup of coffee that tasted like tar, I overheard a couple of locals talking. They were going on about something called a Wendigo, some kind of Native American spirit that haunted these parts. I didn't want to believe it, but the more they talked, the more it sounded like what I'd seen. A tall, gaunt creature with antlers, the smell of death, the way it appeared and disappeared like smoke. I wanted to ask them more, but I was afraid afraid they'd think I was crazy, or worse, that they'd confirm my fears. So I just sat there, eavesdropping and trying not to shake. When dawn finally broke, the storm had passed. The world outside was transformed, everything blanketed in pristine white. It would have been beautiful if I hadn't been so terrified. I got back on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I glanced in my mirrors, I half expected to see that thing loping along behind me, those burning eyes fixed on my truck. The rest of the trip was a blur. I made my delivery in Seattle, but my heart wasn't in it. All I could think about was getting home, getting somewhere that felt safe. But here's the thing about an experience like that. You can't outrun it. It follows you. In the weeks that followed, I found myself jumping at shadows, waking up in a cold sweat night after night. I'd dream about those eyes, that twisted face. Sometimes in my dreams, I didn't manage to keep the truck on the road. I'd feel the weightless terror of going over the edge, see the creature's triumphant leer as it watched me fall. I tried to talk to my wife about it, but the words wouldn't come. How do you tell someone you love that you saw a monster? That you're not sure what's real anymore? So I kept it bottled up, let it eat away at me from the inside. I started doing research, spending hours online reading about wendigos and other creatures. Some of it sounded like superstition, but other accounts, they were too similar to what I'd seen to discount. The more I read, the more I became convinced that these things were real, that there was a whole hidden world out there that most people never see. And once you've glimpsed it, you can never go back. It changed me, that night on the mountain. I used to love the open road, the solitude of long hauls. Now, every trip feels like a risk. Every dark stretch of highway could be hiding something unnatural, something hungry. I've thought about quitting, finding a nice, safe job where I never have to drive at night again. But this is all I know, and part of me, the part that I'm not proud of, wants to see it again, to prove to myself that I'm not crazy, that it really happened. So I keep driving. I take the mountain routes, the lonely back roads. I peer into the darkness, heart pounding, both dreading and hoping for another glimpse of the impossible. Sometimes on cold nights when the moon is hidden and the wind howls just right, I swear I can hear something running alongside my truck, something big with ragged breathing and the click of claws on asphalt. I never look. I'm not sure what scares me more, the thought that I might see that creature again, or the thought that I might not. That it really was all in my head, a momentary lapse brought on by fatigue and bad weather. But then I remember those eyes, the smell, the absolute wrongness of what I saw. And I know deep in my bones that it was real, that for one terrifying moment the veil between our world and something else parted, and I saw through. I've never told this story before, not the whole truth of it anyway, but I figure people should know, should understand that there are things out there, things that defy explanation. So the next time you're driving on a lonely road at night and you see something strange in your headlights, don't slow down. Don't look too closely. Just drive as fast as you can and pray it's not following you. Because once you've seen it, really seen it, you'll never be the same. You'll live the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, jumping at every strange sound in the night. You'll know beyond a shadow of a doubt that we're not alone in this world. And let me tell you, friend, that's a hard way to live. But it's better than the alternative. Better than ending up as just another mysterious disappearance, another unsolved case in some dusty file, another meal for the things that lurk in the shadows. So take it from an old trucker who's seen more than he ever wanted to. Be careful out there. The night is dark, the roads are long, and not everything that walks on two legs is human. Keep your eyes on the road, your hands on the wheel, and whatever you do, don't stop for hitchhikers. The night I saw Bigfoot wasn't just the scariest moment of my trucking career, it was the night that changed everything I thought I knew about the world. And it all started with a broken scale and a cup of lousy coffee. I've been hauling freight across the country for the better part of 2 decades, and I thought I'd seen it all. Lot lizards, highway robbers, freak storms, you name it. But nothing could have prepared me for what went down at that remote way station in the mountains of Northern California. It was a crisp autumn night, the kind where the air feels sharp in your lungs and the stars seem to burn a little brighter. I was running a load of electronics from Sacramento to Seattle, trying to make up time after a delay at the depot. The GPS said there was a way station coming up in about 10 miles, mandatory for all commercial vehicles. As I rounded a bend, I saw the flashing lights indicating the station was open. Unusual for this time of night, but rules are rules. I eased off the throttle and guided my rig onto the exit ramp. The place looked deserted as I pulled up to the scale. Just a small office building, a couple of sodium lights casting a sickly yellow glow, and dense forest pressing in on all sides. I could hear the wind whispering through the pines as I set the brake and killed the engine. I grabbed my logbook and hopped down from the cab, my boots crunching on the gravel. The office door creaked as I pushed it open, and the smell of stale coffee hit me like a wall. "Evening," I called out. No response. The place looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. Faded posters about road safety, a dusty fern in the corner that had seen better days. And behind the counter, a heavy-set guy with a beard that would make ZZ Top jealous. He was hunched over a clipboard, scribbling something. "Hey there," I tried again, "just need to get weighed and—" "Scales busted," he grunted, not looking up. I blinked. "Busted? Then why's the station open?" He finally raised his head, fixing me with a stare that could curdle milk. "Waiting on the tech, should be here soon. You're welcome to wait, or you can take your chances with the cops if they pull you over without a current way slip." I sighed, glancing at my watch. The delay would put me even further behind, but the fine for driving without a valid weight would be worse. "All right, I'll wait. Got any coffee?" He jerked his thumb towards a pot that looked like it had been brewing since the Carter administration. I poured myself a cup, more out of habit than hope, and took a seat by the window. An hour crawled by, then another. The bearded guy disappeared into a back room, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the incessant ticking of a clock on the wall. I was just about to say to hell with it and leave when I heard it. A sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. Part roar, part scream echoing through the trees. It set my hair on end and sent a chill racing down my spine. I was on my feet before I knew it, peering out into the darkness. The sodium lights created pools of sickly yellow, but beyond that was just inky blackness. Then I saw movement at the edge of the trees. At first I thought it was a bear. We get them sometimes, poking around looking for food, but as it moved into the light, I realized this was no bear. It was massive, at least 8 feet tall, covered in shaggy dark fur. It walked on 2 legs but hunched over, its arms nearly touching the ground. And its face, God, its face. It was almost human but twisted, primitive. Small eyes glinted in the artificial light, and I could see muscles rippling under that thick pelt as it moved. I stood there frozen as it lumbered across the lot towards the office. My mind was screaming at me to run, to hide, to do something. But I couldn't move. I was trapped in a waking nightmare. It stopped about 20 feet from the building, raising its head and sniffing the air. Then it turned and looked directly at me through the window. Our eyes met, and in that moment I felt something I can't quite explain. It wasn't just fear, though there was plenty of that. It was a sort of recognition, like it knew me, knew what I was thinking. There was intelligence in those eyes and something else, something ancient and wild. The spell was broken by the sound of an engine. Headlights swept across the parking lot as another truck pulled in. The creature's head snapped around, and in 2 bounds it was back in the tree line and gone. I must have made some kind of noise because the bearded guy came hustling out of the back room. "You okay, buddy? Look like you've seen a ghost." I opened my mouth, closed it, tried again. There was... Did you see that?" He cocked an eyebrow. "See what?" I pointed towards the window, my hand shaking. Out there, it was huge, like a man but not a man, covered in fur. It was... I trailed off, realizing how insane I must sound. The guy's expression changed, just for a second. Was it recognition? Fear? But then it was gone, replaced by a look of concern. "Think maybe you dozed off there, pal. Happens to the best of us. Why don't you step outside, get some air? Scale Tech just pulled up. We'll have you on your way in no time." I nodded dumbly and stumbled outside. The night air was cool on my face, and I gulped it down like a drowning man. Had I imagined it? Maybe I really had fallen asleep, had some kind of vivid dream brought on by too much bad coffee and too little rest. But then I saw the footprints, massive impressions in the gravel, easily twice the size of my boot. They led from the forest to where the creature had stood, then back again. Real physical evidence that I hadn't imagined it. I was still staring at them when the other driver walked up. "You okay, man? You look like you've seen a—" "Don't say it," I cut him off. "Just don't." He followed my gaze to the footprints. His eyes widened. "Holy shit, is that—" I nodded. "Yeah, I think it is." We stood there in silence for a moment, two truckers confronted with something that shouldn't exist. Then he let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. Guess the stories are true." "Stories?" He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "This stretch of road, these mountains, there have been sightings for years. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. Most folks write it off as bullshit, you know? Drunk drivers seeing things. But I've talked to guys, good guys, solid guys, who swear they've seen something out here." I felt a mix of relief and terror. Relief that I wasn't crazy, that someone else knew about this. And terror at the implications. If this was real, what else was out there that we didn't know about? The scale tech finished his work and we both got weighed and cleared to go. As I climbed back into my rig, the bearded guy from the office approached. "Hey," he said, his voice low. "About what you saw. Might be best if you keep that to yourself, you know? Some things people aren't ready to hear about." I studied his face. There was something there, a knowledge, a weariness. "You've seen it too, haven't you?" He didn't answer, just gave me a long look before turning and heading back to the office. As I pulled back onto the highway, my mind was reeling. I'd always been a practical man, focused on the here and now. Miles to drive, deadlines to meet. But now I found myself wondering about the deeper mysteries of the world. What else was out there, hiding in the shadows? What other secrets did these forests hold? I've made that run dozens of times since that night. Every time I find myself scanning the tree line, half hoping, half dreading to catch another glimpse of that creature. I've never seen it again, but sometimes on quiet nights when the moon is high and the wind is just right, I swear I can hear something moving out there in the darkness. Something big, something not quite human. And you know what? I'm okay with that, because that night taught me something important. It taught me that the world is bigger, stranger, and more wonderful than we can imagine, that there are still mysteries out there, still things to discover. So the next time you're driving down a lonely stretch of road and you see something out of the corner of your eye that doesn't quite make sense, don't dismiss it. Don't explain it away. Instead, take a moment to wonder, to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there's more to this world than meets the eye. After all, if Bigfoot is real, what else might be out there waiting to be discovered? They say truth is stranger than fiction, but let me tell you, when you've seen a 7-foot lizard man slithering around a truck stop shower, the line between truth and madness starts to blur. I've been hauling freight for 23 years and I thought I'd seen it all. Turns out I hadn't seen squat. It was a sweltering July night in the armpit of Nevada. I'd been on the road for 14 hours straight, my eyes gritty from staring at the endless ribbon of asphalt stretching out before me. The air conditioning in my rig had given up the ghost somewhere around Reno, and I was marinating in my own sweat. When I saw the glowing sign for Big Earl's truck stop looming on the horizon like a neon oasis, I nearly wept with relief. All I wanted was a lukewarm shower, a greasy burger, and maybe 5 hours of shut-eye before hitting the road again. The parking lot was a graveyard of semis, their engines ticking as they cooled in the night air. I guided my rig into an empty spot, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment, listening to the silence. That's when I first felt it, a weird prickling sensation on the back of my neck like someone was watching me. I shook it off. Paranoia was an occupational hazard in this line of work. Long hours, lonely roads, and too much caffeine could do funny things to a man's mind. Grabbing my duffel bag and shower kit, I made my way across the lot. The asphalt was still radiating heat and the air smelled of diesel and fryer grease. As I pushed open the door to the truck stop, a blast of cold air hit me like a slap in the face. The fluorescent lights inside were harsh after hours of darkness, and I squinted as my eyes adjusted. A bored-looking cashier glanced up from her magazine, then went back to reading. The place was nearly deserted, just a couple of road-weary drivers nursing cups of coffee at the counter. I nodded to the cashier. "Shower still open?" She popped her gum and jerked her thumb towards the back. "Number 3's free, $5. I slid a crumpled 5 across the counter and she handed me a key attached to a plastic fob the size of a hubcap. As I turned to head for the showers, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Something large darted behind a rack of snack cakes. I blinked, sure I was seeing things. When I looked again, there was nothing there. The shower room was like every other truck stop shower I'd ever been in, small, slightly grimy, with harsh lighting that made you look 10 years older and twice as tired. But right then, it looked like the Ritz-Carlton to me. I cranked the hot water and stepped under the spray, letting it sluice away the grime and fatigue. For a few blissful minutes, I forgot about deadlines and dispatchers and the endless miles of road ahead. That's when I heard it, a soft, scraping sound like scales on tile. My eyes snapped open, soap stinging as I peered through the steam. There, in the gap between the shower curtain and the wall, I saw something that made my blood run cold. An eye, not human, not animal, something in between. Vertical pupil iris, a swirling mix of green and gold. It blinked, nictitating membrane sliding across its surface. I let out a yell, nearly slipping as I scrambled back. The eye disappeared. I stood there, heart pounding, water still running. Had I imagined it? Was I so exhausted that I was hallucinating? With shaking hands, I shut off the water and reached for my towel. That's when I saw the footprint on the bathroom floor. Or rather, the claw print, 3 toes with wicked-looking claw marks gouging the linoleum. I dressed in record time, my wet hair dripping down my neck as I burst out of the shower room. The cashier looked up, startled. "You okay, mister? Look like you've seen a ghost." I opened my mouth, then closed it. What was I going to say? That I'd seen some kind of lizard monster peeping on me in the shower? That would be a one-way ticket to a padded room. "I'm fine," I managed. "Just thought I saw a spider." She snorted. "Yeah, we get some big ones out here. Want some coffee? Looks like you could use it." I nodded, grateful for the normalcy. As she poured me a cup, I glanced around the store. Everything looked normal. No sign of any reptilian intruders. I was halfway through my coffee when the other shoe dropped. A trucker burst through the door, his face pale beneath his trucker's tan. "You guys gotta call the cops or animal control or something," he gasped. "There's some kind of thing out there." The cashier sighed, looking bored. "What kind of thing, Jerry? If it's another coyote, I told you they're harmless if you just—" "It ain't no damn coyote," Jerry shouted. "It's big, like man-sized. But it ain't a man. I saw it climbing on my truck, quick as lightning, had a tail and everything." I felt the coffee turn to ice in my stomach. So I hadn't imagined it. The cashier rolled her eyes. "Jerry, how many times do I have to tell you? No lot lizards allowed. If you're going to pick up company, do it somewhere. I'm telling you, it was a real lizard, or something like one. Jesus, Doreen, you got to believe me." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly on the linoleum. Both of them turned to look at me. "I saw it too," I said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Doreen burst out laughing. "Oh, for Christ's sake, not you too. Look, I don't know what kind of joke you two are trying to pull, but it ain't funny. Now either buy something or get out. I got work to do." Jerry and I exchanged glances. There was fear in his eyes and recognition. He'd seen what I'd seen. We ended up in the parking lot, speaking in hushed tones as we scanned the shadows between the trucks. "What the hell was that thing?" I asked. Jerry shook his head. "Damned if I know. Been driving this route for 15 years, never seen anything like it. But I know what I saw. It was on my truck, moving like nothing I've ever seen, fast, unnatural. I saw its eye," I admitted. "In the shower, and a footprint, like a giant lizard." Jerry let out a low whistle. You think it could be one of them cryptids, like Bigfoot or something?" I wanted to laugh, to tell him he was crazy. But after what I'd seen, I wasn't so sure anymore. That's when we heard it, a low hiss coming from beneath a nearby truck. We both froze, eyes wide in the darkness. Slowly, something emerged from the shadows. At first, I thought it was a man in some kind of costume. But as it came into the light, I realized with dawning horror that this was no costume. It stood easily 7 feet tall, bipedal but hunched. Its skin was a mottled green and brown, textured like the hide of an alligator. A powerful tail swished behind it, and its hands— dear God, its hands. 3 fingers. tipped with curved claws that looked like they could gut a man in seconds. But it was the face that truly chilled me to my core. A blunt snout filled with needle-sharp teeth. And those eyes, the same eyes I'd seen in the shower, intelligent, predatory, ancient. For a long moment, we all just stared at each other. Me, Jerry, and this impossible creature that should not exist. I could hear Jerry's ragged breathing beside me, smell the fierce sweat pouring off him. Then, faster than I would have believed possible, the creature moved. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, a blur of scales and muscle as it darted between the trucks. We stood there for what felt like hours, straining our eyes and ears for any sign of its return. But there was nothing. Just the quiet hum of idling engines and the distant howl of a coyote. Finally, Jerry broke the silence. What do we do now? I shook my head, still trying to process what I'd seen. I don't know, man. I mean, who'd believe us? We could call the cops, he suggested, but his tone made it clear he knew how that would go. In the end, we did nothing. What could we do? Report a lizard man sighting? We'd be laughed out of town, or worse, locked up for psychiatric evaluation. So we went our separate ways. Jerry headed east, me west. But as I climbed into my rig, I knew things would never be the same. The world had changed, or maybe I had. Either way, the long, dark highway ahead seemed full of new terrors and possibilities. I've never seen the creature again, but I've heard stories. Whispered tales at truck stops and rest areas. Other drivers who've caught glimpses of something scaly and fast in the night. Most laugh it off, call it an urban legend, but I know the truth. And let me tell you, friend, it's changed the way I see the world. Now, when I'm driving those lonely stretches of highway in the dead of night, I keep one eye on the road and one eye on the shadows. Because you never know what might be lurking there, waiting to remind us that the world is a whole lot stranger and more terrifying than we ever imagined.